On our anniversary night, I found out where my husband had really been going after work. I remember standing in the kitchen that evening, stirring the pot of pasta while the smell of garlic filled the room. Our anniversary had always been simple, but it mattered to me. I'd spent the afternoon cleaning, lighting candles, and setting the table. The house felt warm. I wanted us to feel connected again. As I moved around the kitchen, I kept glancing at the clock, waiting for the sound of his car in the driveway. He had promised he wouldn't be late tonight. The soft hum of the dishwasher was the only company I had. My chest tightened with each passing minute. I told myself to be patient. When he finally called, his voice sounded rushed, almost distracted. He said a project had taken longer than expected, and he needed to stop by the office. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, listening for background noise. I heard nothing. The silence made something uneasy settle in my stomach. I tried to shake it off and returned to the dining room, adjusting the silverware even though it was already straight. The candles flickered gently, casting a soft glow on the plates. I imagined him walking in, smiling, grateful for the effort. That image kept me going. I clung to it desperately. Minutes stretched like hours, and the pasta began sticking to the bottom of the pot. I turned off the stove and opened a window, letting in a cool breeze. Felt grounding against my warm skin. I could sense my disappointment building. I didn't want tonight to become another memory I avoided. I walked through the living room, brushing my fingers along the back of the couch, as though the fabric could steady my thoughts. The house felt too quiet. Even the ticking clock on the wall felt louder than usual. I checked the driveway again. Still no headlights, only darkness pressing against the windows. I tried calling him again, but it went straight to voicemail. His recorded greeting felt strangely distant, as if he belonged to another life altogether. I lowered the phone slowly, feeling a faint trembling in my hand. There was no reason for it to be off. Not tonight. Not when he knew I was waiting. I stepped outside for a moment, letting the cool air hit my face. The street was empty except for the dim glow of a porch light across the road. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling a mix of worry and frustration. I wanted to believe him. I wanted this night to feel meaningful. Back inside, I lifted the pot from the stove and drained the pasta, watching steam swirl upward like a sigh. My hands moved automatically, but my mind wandered. I kept imagining his face, the way he'd look walking through the door. I didn't know whether I missed him or missed who he used to be. I set the plates aside and straightened the napkins again, though they didn't need adjusting. I'd done this so many times before on nights when he said he'd be home soon. Each small action felt like a quiet plea. I wanted to feel chosen. I wanted to feel like a priority. I walked down the hallway and paused outside our bedroom door, noticing how untouched everything felt. The bed was neatly made, the pillows fluffed from the morning. I traced the wooden door frame with my fingertips, remembering when coming home to him felt comforting. Lately it felt like waiting for someone who never truly arrived. I sat at the edge of the bed for a moment, listening to the faint buzz of the heater turning on. The room smelled faintly of laundry detergent, familiar but distant. I folded my hands in my lap, trying to steady myself. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I only wanted honesty. I went back to the living room and sat on the couch, letting my fingers tap restlessly against the fabric. The silence grew heavier, settling on my shoulders like a weight. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. I wondered if he ever thought about how these moments felt for me. I stood up and walked toward the window, pressing my palms softly against the cool glass. The streetlights flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the pavement. I stared out, hoping to see his headlights appear at the corner. My breath fogged the window. I whispered a quiet reminder to myself to stay calm. After a while, I returned to the table and lifted one of the candles, letting the small flame warm my hand. The melted wax glowed softly. I felt a heaviness in my chest. Not anger, just a quiet ache. I wanted the night to mean something. I wanted to feel seen again. It mattered to me deeply. Over the next few days, the loneliness I had been trying so hard to ignore settled over me in a way I could finally feel in my bones. I had always been someone who filled silence with movement, but lately the quiet felt heavier. Each morning, I woke hoping the distance between us might shrink, yet nothing inside me felt steady anymore. I found myself noticing small things I had brushed aside before. His rushed goodbyes in the morning, the way he flinched when I reached for his hand, the careful guard he kept around his phone. None of it felt loud on its own, but together it formed a low ache inside me. I kept telling myself not to overreact, but the uneasiness lingered. On my drive home from work, I caught myself staring at the empty passenger seat, wondering when it had last felt filled by him in a meaningful way. We used to take long, simple drives just to be together. Now, I felt like I was always driving alone, even when he was technically in the car with me. The absence was emotional, not physical. Each evening, I tried to keep myself busy. Washing dishes that were already clean, folding laundry twice, wiping down the same counters. The repetitive motions soothed me for a moment, but the quiet behind them always returned. I'd move through the rooms listening to the low hum of the refrigerator or the soft creak of the house settling. Anything to distract my thoughts. Sometimes I'd stand in the doorway of our bedroom, watching the way his side of the bed remained neatly made until he finally slipped under the sheets long after midnight. He always smelled faintly of the outside air, as if he had been somewhere he didn't want to explain. I never said anything. I didn't want to sound suspicious. I just wanted answers without having to ask for them. There were moments when I tried to bring up how distant everything felt. He would nod gently, say he was stressed, promise things would calm down soon. His voice sounded rehearsed, like someone repeating lines they didn't believe. I tried to convince myself this was temporary, a phase, something marriage naturally endured. But even then, a quiet part of me knew better. My friend Danielle noticed before I said a word. When she came over one afternoon, she studied me carefully while we sat at the kitchen table sipping tea. She asked if everything was all right, and I laughed too quickly, brushing her off. Her eyes softened with concern. I could tell she didn't buy my answer, and that scared me more than my own doubts did. At home, the smallest objects began feeling like reminders. His jacket draped over the chair, still smelling faintly of cologne. His coffee mug in the sink, the one he insisted was his favorite. Even the sound of his footsteps in the hallway felt unfamiliar, as if someone I used to love had returned wearing his shape but not his warmth. I kept trying to feel connected, but nothing landed. There were nights when he fell asleep before me, and I would lie there listening to his breathing. I used to find comfort in its rhythm, but now I listened for clues. Did he seem restless, guilty, stressed? The room felt colder on those nights, even with the heater running softly. I kept pulling the blanket tighter around myself, as though warmth could replace reassurance. I began waking earlier than usual, unable to shake the growing heaviness. I'd stand in the kitchen with my hands wrapped around a warm mug, feeling the faint steam brush my face. Through the window, the sky always looked gray before sunrise, mirroring the way I felt inside. Even when he walked in behind me, offering a tired greeting, the space between us stayed wide. There were moments when I tried convincing myself that this was normal, that long-term relationships went through dull stretches, that work could really be that demanding, that I was reading too much into things. But the excuses felt thin. I felt like I was constantly pushing away truths that hovered just out of reach. And every time I pushed, they drifted back closer. One evening, after he'd left for yet another late shift, I sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, the TV playing quietly in the background. I stared at the flickering light on the wall, realizing how familiar this routine had become. Waiting, wondering, trying to keep myself from imagining the worst. The loneliness felt larger than the room around me. I didn't want to admit the fear forming inside me, that my marriage was quietly slipping into a place I no longer recognized. I kept hoping for a moment of clarity, something that would tell me everything was fine. But all I had were questions, silence, and the lingering thought that the distance between us wasn't accidental. And as I sat there in the soft glow of the living room lamp, I realized how long I'd been waiting for him to come back to me in ways that had nothing to do with walking through the front door. In the weeks that followed, I kept replaying moments from the past few years, noticing patterns I had once dismissed as normal stress. It was strange how clearly I could see them now. Back then, I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. I wanted our life to feel stable, dependable, predictable. But when I looked back, love had slowly started to feel like guesswork long before our anniversary night. I remembered how we used to talk about everything. Our days, our plans, the small things that made us laugh. Somewhere along the way, those conversations thinned out, becoming polite exchanges instead of real connection. I would ask about his day, and he'd answer with the same vague phrases every time. Busy. Long. Nothing worth talking about. I would smile and nod, telling myself it wasn't a big deal. I can still picture the first time I felt something shift between us. We were sitting at a restaurant with warm lighting and soft music playing in the background. I had been excited for that night, thinking it would bring us closer. But he spent most of the dinner glancing at his phone, angling it away from me each time it buzzed. I tried to ignore the sting, focusing on my meal, pretending it didn't bother me. I told myself he must have been dealing with something urgent at work. I used to pride myself on being understanding. I thought patience was a sign of love. But looking back, patience had turned into silence, and silence had turned into distance. I didn't notice how stretched thin we had become until the threads holding us together felt fragile. Even small routines changed. He stopped kissing me goodbye in the mornings. He'd rush out the door with his coffee, barely glancing back. I'd stand there for a moment after he left, staring at the space he'd just occupied, wondering why the air felt heavier than before. I'd always blamed it on early mornings or deadlines, brushing off the discomfort as normal adult stress. My sister once asked me if everything was okay between us. It had been during a family barbecue on a warm afternoon. I laughed it off, convinced she was overanalyzing because she only saw us in passing. But her question lingered afterward. Every time I thought of it, a quiet uneasiness settled over me. Still, I didn't investigate. I didn't want to turn suspicion into reality. There were times when he surprised me with small gestures. A takeout meal from my favorite place. A new book he said reminded him of me. Those moments felt like glimpses of the man I had once known. They were comforting, and they pulled me back into believing everything was fine. But those gestures also created confusion. They made me question my instincts, telling myself I was being dramatic. I remember one night when he came home late, his shirt slightly wrinkled, his hair tousled in a way that didn't match a day at the office. He smelled faintly of a perfume I didn't own. I held the door for him as he walked inside, and he brushed past me with a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. I wanted to ask where he had been, but my voice caught. I didn't want to create tension. Instead, I swallowed the question and tried to pretend nothing was off. Another time, I noticed he had started locking his phone with a new passcode. It wasn't a conversation we had. It just appeared one day. When I asked about it casually, he shrugged and said it was for security. I nodded, pretending the answer satisfied me, though confusion sat heavy in my chest. It was one more change I tried to bury. As the months went by, the warmth in our home felt less consistent. We still shared dinners sometimes, but the air felt different. He was present, but he wasn't with me. He ate quickly, often checking his phone between bites, and then disappeared into the bedroom or the porch. I'd sit at the table long after he finished, feeling like the room was split into two separate worlds. There were days when I blamed myself for the softness fading from our marriage. I wondered if I had become too busy, too distracted, too distant. I questioned whether I had missed opportunities to reconnect, whether I had lost pieces of myself that he once loved. But even in that self-doubt, something inside me whispered that relationships don't dim this much from neglect alone. They dim when something outside of them starts growing. The hardest part was that I still loved him. That love made everything feel complicated. It made me want to give him the benefit of the doubt, even when the evidence of his distance grew stronger. I didn't want to see shadows where there were none, yet I couldn't ignore how little light remained. A few nights before our anniversary, I noticed him smiling down at his phone, an expression I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. It was subtle, a small lift at the corner of his mouth, but it struck me deeply. I asked who he was texting, trying to make it sound casual, and he quickly locked the screen. He said it was nothing important. His tone was too quick, too practiced. The moment etched itself into my memory. Looking back on it now, I can see how these small signs pointed toward a truth I wasn't ready to face. But at the time, all I felt was confusion, longing, and a growing sense that something had slipped out of my reach without me noticing. I just didn't yet understand how much it mattered. In the days leading up to our anniversary, I noticed myself watching him more closely without meaning to. It wasn't intentional at first. It just happened in quiet moments, while he tied his shoes in the morning or scrolled through his messages at night. I paid attention to the way his shoulders tensed when a notification appeared, how he angled the phone slightly away from me, almost instinctively. These were such small behaviors, but they settled into my awareness like tiny weights. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking. Stress could make anyone guarded. But the shift wasn't only in his phone habits. His entire rhythm changed. He started showering as soon as he got home, something he never did before unless he had been working outside or exercising. Now he hurried straight to the bathroom, closing the door behind him with a kind of urgency that didn't match the rest of his day. One evening, as he walked past me with his work bag slung over his shoulder, I caught the faint scent of something floral. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't the detergent we used. I paused, feeling my breath catch slightly. He didn't notice. He just said he needed to unwind and disappeared down the hall. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the closed bathroom door, listening to the water run. The sound felt loud in my chest. I didn't want to become the kind of person who snooped or pried. I'd always believed trust was built by giving space, not crowding it. But it was becoming harder to ignore the way he seemed to live in two separate spaces. One inside our home, and one in a world I couldn't see. I didn't know how to navigate that uncertainty. All I knew was that something inside me felt unsettled. At work, I struggled to stay focused. Papers blurred on my desk, and conversations felt distant. My thoughts kept circling back to him. His late nights, his constant phone use, his sudden desire for privacy. My coworkers asked if I was tired, and I laughed it off. But beneath the surface, I felt a steady hum of worry that didn't let up. One afternoon, while waiting for my lunch order, I realized how tense my body had become. My shoulders were tight, and my jaw ached from clenching without noticing. It struck me then how deeply the uncertainty had woven itself into my day-to-day life. I wasn't just worried about him. I was worried about what these changes meant for us. That night, when he came home later than usual, I watched him quietly from the kitchen doorway. He moved through the house like someone trying not to disturb anything. His footsteps were soft, his eyes shifting away quickly when they met mine. There was a distance in his movements I couldn't ignore anymore. I asked if he'd eaten, trying to sound neutral. He said he grabbed something on the way home, not meeting my eyes. His voice felt thin, like a thread stretched too tight. After he went to bed, I stayed in the living room with only a small lamp on, the warm glow soft against the furniture. I stared at the shadows on the wall, trying to piece together the fragments of what I felt but couldn't prove. There was no single moment I could point to, no clear evidence. Just a collection of small, quiet changes that made my heart feel unsteady. I knew I needed clarity, but I didn't know how to ask without sounding accusatory. I didn't want to start a fight. I just wanted the truth, whatever it was. Yet every time I considered bringing it up, I froze, afraid of what his answer might be. It felt easier, in a way, to stay in uncertainty than to face a reality that might break me. One morning, I watched him from across the kitchen as he reached for his keys. His expression seemed distant, as though he were already somewhere else long before he stepped outside. He barely looked at me as he said goodbye, the word leaving his mouth with a quickness that stung. When the door closed behind him, the house fell into a silence that felt heavier than usual. I stood there, my hand resting on the edge of the counter, trying to steady my breathing. The morning light filtered through the window, bright but cold, casting long streaks across the tile floor. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, a mixture of longing, confusion, and something that felt close to fear. Later that evening, I found myself sitting on the edge of the bed, running my fingers over the fabric of the comforter. The texture felt soft beneath my hand, grounding me for a moment. I thought about how many evenings had passed like this, quiet, uncertain, filled with questions I was too afraid to ask. I realized then how much effort I had put into pretending everything was stable. I had softened my questions, numbed my instincts, and quieted my concerns, all in the hope that the version of him I missed would somehow return. But the silence between us kept widening, stretching into something I could no longer ignore. As I finally lay down and pulled the blankets over myself, I felt the emptiness beside me more sharply than before. It was strange how someone could sleep inches away from you and still feel miles apart. I stared at the ceiling, listening to his quiet breathing, wishing I knew how to bring us back to a place where love wasn't something I had to search for. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while my husband slept beside me, peacefully, effortlessly, like a man without guilt. His breathing was slow and steady. Mine was shaky, shallow, and panicked. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that receipt again. That woman's name, the hotel, the time. The truth pressed on my chest like a weight. He wasn't just lying. He was living another life. By sunrise, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to accuse him, not yet. I needed proof. I needed the whole truth, not pieces. He still thought everything was normal. He woke up humming, kissed my forehead, grabbed his coffee, and told me he'd be back late again. I nodded like the supportive wife he expected me to be, all while my heart was tearing itself apart inside my chest. As soon as he walked out the door, I grabbed my keys. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew where to start. The hotel. The lobby smelled like citrus and expensive cologne. Too clean, too polished. The kind of place meant for business executives and cheaters. I went up to the front desk, palms sweating. Hi. My husband was here yesterday. I think he may have left something in the room. Could you check for me? The receptionist typed something into her computer. Sure. What's his name? I gave it. My heart hammered so loudly I could barely hear her response. Oh yes, she said brightly. He checked in at 3 p.m. and checked out at 6. Let me see who he was with so I can confirm My stomach dropped. She stopped herself abruptly. I'm sorry, she said, her tone shifting. I can't give out guest information. But she had already said everything I needed. He checked in. He wasn't alone. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a smile. That's okay, thank you. I walked out of the hotel with trembling hands. The cold January air stung my face, but it was nothing compared to the pain burning in my chest. My husband was having an affair. There was no other explanation. But I still didn't know with who. I needed more. Back home, I went straight to his small office in the basement. He always kept it locked, but after years of marriage, you learn things. Like which drawer he hid the spare keys in. The first thing I noticed was his desk drawer. Unlocked. Inside were neatly arranged folders, tax documents, insurance papers, old bills. Nothing unusual. But tucked between 2 envelopes was a small black binder I'd never seen. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were printed emails, messages, dates, hotel confirmations. Every page hit like a punch. Some were from months ago. Others were recent, very recent. But the worst part? None of them showed the woman's full name. Only initials. A. The same initial on the hotel receipt. My vision blurred with tears. It felt like my heart was splitting open, but I kept turning the pages. I had to understand. I had to know how long this betrayal had been happening. Then I found the last page. A single printed message. Time-stamped just 2 days earlier. I can't wait until she finds out. This will be easier once everything is out in the open. Just let me handle it. My blood ran cold. Until she finds out? Let me handle it? This wasn't just cheating. They weren't just meeting in hotels. They were planning something. Something involving me. Something they were waiting to come out. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the message, reading it again and again, trying to make sense of it. Then it hit me. This wasn't just an affair. They were planning something behind my back. Something bigger. something worse. But I still didn't know who this woman was. And then, as if the universe wanted to answer me, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message. From an unknown number. I opened it, expecting spam. My heart nearly stopped. It was a photo. My husband. Standing in a driveway I didn't recognize. Holding a baby. And the caption below the picture read, "You deserve to know the truth. He wasn't at work yesterday." My entire body went numb. A baby? A driveway? A stranger sending me photos? I felt the room close in around me. My husband wasn't just cheating. He was lying about far more than where he spent his afternoons. And now a stranger was reaching out. Because apparently I was the one who had been left in the dark the longest. I sank onto the floor, the binder slipping from my hands. I had been living with a man I didn't even know. And whatever truth this stranger wanted to reveal, I had a feeling it was going to destroy everything. For a long moment, I just sat there on the basement floor, staring at the photo on my phone. My husband's face, so familiar, so trusted, looked different now. He was smiling in the picture, holding that baby like he'd done it 1,000 times. Like he wasn't some stranger's child, but his own. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't know who sent the picture. I didn't know whose house he was at. I didn't know whose baby that was. But I knew one thing with absolute gut-wrenching clarity. My husband was living a life I knew nothing about, and someone wanted me to finally see it. I forced myself to zoom in on the photo, searching for anything. A house number, a street name, something recognizable. The siding was blue. There was a cracked flower pot on the porch. A small wreath on the door. Nothing that told me where it was. But the baby couldn't have been more than 6 months old. My heart squeezed painfully. Was he the father? The question tasted like poison. My phone buzzed again. A second message. "You don't know me, but you need to see this. He won't tell you." No name. No explanation. No threats. Just a simple, devastating truth. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed, "Who are you?" Then deleted it. I typed, "Why are you sending me this?" Deleted that too. Finally, I just wrote, "Who is the baby?" The 3 dots appeared, typing. My breath caught. Then they vanished. Then they reappeared. Then nothing. Minutes passed. Silence. The kind of silence that eats at your bones. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. No response. I couldn't sit there anymore. I felt trapped inside my own skin, like the walls were closing around me. I needed air. I drove without thinking, my mind in a fog, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The cold winter wind slapped my face when I cracked the window, but it didn't calm the storm inside me. I wasn't ready to go home. I wasn't ready to see my husband. I wasn't ready for any of this. So I went to the only place where I could think. My sister Hannah's house. She opened the door in her robe, hair in a messy bun, coffee in hand. The second she saw my face, her brows furrowed. What happened? I didn't trust myself to speak. I just shoved the phone into her hand. She stared at the photo for a long time. Then she looked at me, eyes wide. "Is that your husband?" I nodded. "And that baby?" "I don't know," I whispered, my voice cracking. She pulled me inside. "Okay, sit. Start from the beginning." So I did. The receipt, the hotel, the binder, the printed emails, the message from A, the photo. Hannah listened silently, her face growing darker with every word. When I finished, she exhaled sharply. "This is serious. This isn't just some fling." I swallowed hard. "I know. Do you think the baby could be his?" I bit my lip until I tasted blood. "I don't know what to think." Hannah leaned forward. "You need answers. And if he's not giving them, someone else clearly wants you to have them." Her eyes flicked to my phone. "Text them again." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But something stopped me. "What if it's a trap?" I said quietly. "What if this is all some setup?" "Why would someone set you up?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. I just had a growing pit in my stomach. "I can't face him," I whispered. "Then don't," she said. "Not yet." But he'll come home expecting dinner, expecting everything to be normal. She scoffed. Normal ended the minute he walked into a hotel with another woman. Her words stung, but she was right. Look, she said, taking my hand. You're not alone. Stay here tonight. Or stay as long as you need. The offer made something inside me crumble. Thank you, I whispered. But as comforting as her house felt, as warm as her embrace was, something kept nagging at me. That baby, that message, that woman, There were too many loose threads, too many secrets hiding in the dark. And whoever had sent that photo, they weren't finished. That night, after Hannah went to bed, I sat alone on her couch, scrolling through old photos of my husband and me. Birthdays, vacations, laughing, kissing, holding hands. Every picture felt like a lie. My phone buzzed again. My heart jumped into my throat. The same unknown number. A new message. If you want the truth, be at the address I send tomorrow morning. Come alone. A moment later, another message arrived. A location. A house on the outskirts of town. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold the phone. Someone wanted me there. Someone wanted to reveal something. Someone wanted me to see the truth with my own eyes. I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. Whatever was waiting for me in that house. It would change everything. I couldn't sleep that night. The address burned in my mind like a brand, and every scenario I imagined made my chest tighten. I stared at the phone, tracing the numbers with my fingertip as though that could somehow make sense of them. Should I go? Should I wait for more information? My mind raced in circles, but a part of me knew I had to see for myself. Morning came slowly. The sky was gray, the kind of pale light that made the world feel muted and heavy. I slipped on my coat, keeping my movements quiet so Hannah wouldn't wake. She was still asleep, trusting me enough to give me space, not knowing the storm swirling inside my head. I walked to my car, my hands clammy around the steering wheel, heart hammering in a rhythm I couldn't control. The drive was tense. Every car that passed made me flinch. Every turn felt like a test, every stoplight a trap. I kept checking the address against the GPS, making sure I wasn't imagining it. The neighborhood was unfamiliar. Streets lined with tall trees that had lost their leaves, the cold wind whipping through them and rattling the branches. Each sound made my pulse spike. When I finally pulled up to the street, the house was exactly as the messages had described. A modest blue home with a cracked flower pot on the porch and a small wreath on the door. It looked ordinary, quiet, suburban, like every house I'd driven past 100 times in my life. And yet, in that ordinariness, my stomach twisted. Something unseen, something dangerous, waited inside. I parked a few houses down, keeping the engine running, listening to the sound of the wind and the distant hum of traffic. I watched the driveway. Nothing moved at first, just the cold gray street and the shadows cast by the early morning light. Then, a small shape appeared in the window. A baby, wrapped in a blanket, barely moving. My breath hitched. I hadn't expected to see anything yet. And then I saw him, my husband. He came out of the side door, holding the baby gently, his expression soft, relaxed. He laughed, a low, easy sound I hadn't heard directed at me in years. He was talking to someone behind the screen door. Their voices were muffled, but the tone was intimate, calm, familiar in a way that tore at something inside me. I pressed my hands to the steering wheel, trying to steady myself. My mind spun with questions. Who was she? How long had this been happening? Was the baby his? Was it part of this hidden life he had been living right under my nose? Every answer felt like it would break me more. I couldn't move forward. I couldn't retreat. I felt frozen, caught between the desire to storm in and demand answers and the fear that I'd never come back the same. For a long time, I just watched. My chest ached with every interaction I couldn't understand, every smile he shared that wasn't meant for me. After what felt like hours, I noticed small details. His hands, the way he held the baby, the soft gestures of care I hadn't seen in months, even years. The tenderness was infuriating. It was proof of the life he had built without me. a life I had no part in. My throat tightened, and I swallowed hard to keep from crying. I needed more than glimpses. I needed clarity. I drove slowly around the block, circling the street, trying to think through my options. Should I confront him? Should I wait until I had proof, evidence I could hold up and not just rely on memory and feelings? I couldn't risk acting out of anger or despair. I had to be strategic. I parked again across the street, this time taking notes on every detail, the car in the driveway, the blinds, the timing of arrivals and departures. Every small observation felt like a breadcrumb leading me closer to understanding the full story. I knew this wasn't just about an affair. It was about a life carefully hidden from me, a life I had been blind to until now. By mid-morning, the sun had shifted, casting sharper shadows across the street. I felt my anxiety settle into a strange, determined calm. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to cry in the street. Not yet. I was going to watch, learn, and prepare. This hidden world he had created wasn't going to surprise me again. I took a deep breath and returned to the car, keeping my distance. I started to map his patterns in my head. The times he left, the route he took, the quiet movements of the house. Each observation was another piece of the puzzle. I realized, with a strange mix of dread and resolve, that I was beginning to understand him in a way I never wanted to, but needed to. I sat in the car, the cold seeping through my coat. The baby's soft cries carried faintly through the window, and felt the first stirrings of something like clarity. The life he had been hiding was real. The betrayal was deeper than I could have imagined. And I knew, in that quiet, gray morning, that I couldn't turn away. I had to see it through. I parked a few houses away, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. My chest felt tight, and my stomach was a knot of anticipation and dread. I didn't know if I was ready to step closer, to see the house with my own eyes, but something inside me wouldn't let me leave. I needed to know. I needed to see where he had really been going all this time. The house was quiet, deceptively calm. Nothing seemed out of place. A wind chime in the yard rattled softly as the cold breeze moved through the trees. I took a step out of the car, then another, my boots crunching lightly against the gravel. Every sound felt magnified, the faint creak of a branch, the rustle of leaves. My heart hammered like a drum in my chest. I stayed in the shadows, crouching low behind a hedge that lined the edge of the property. Through the window I could see him moving inside. He wasn't alone. There was a woman there, someone I didn't recognize, and a baby in his arms. The sight hit me like a punch to the stomach. Every step he had taken, every lie he had told, led to this moment. He smiled at her, his expression soft and familiar, but it wasn't for me. It was for her. And the baby. The room was filled with warmth I hadn't seen in our home in months, maybe even years. They laughed quietly, voices low but full of comfort. I wanted to look away, to retreat, but my eyes were glued to them. I couldn't unsee it. I crouched there for what felt like hours, memorizing every detail. The way he held the baby gently, the way he tucked a strand of hair from the woman's face behind her ear. He looked at them like they were the center of his world. And I realized, with a shattering clarity, that for all those evenings he had spent away, all those late nights at work, this had been his life, his secret life. My husband had been living it right under my nose. My breath caught when he turned slightly, adjusting the baby in his arms, and I noticed a faint cologne that wasn't mine. I knew it. I had smelled it before. The subtle floral notes he'd carried home, the ones I had tried to ignore, now made perfect sense. Every instinct I had buried, the unease, the questions, the silent suspicions, they had been right all along. I felt my hands start to shake, my knees weaken. I sank a little lower behind the hedge, hiding my face. A tear slid down my cheek. I hated that I was crying, but I couldn't stop it. This was the proof I had needed, the answer I had feared. And yet it hurt far more than I imagined it would. The betrayal wasn't just in his actions. It was in the quiet deception, the way he had carried on with this other life while pretending everything was normal with me. I thought about confronting him. I thought about bursting through that door, screaming, demanding answers. But a small, rational part of me whispered to wait, to watch, to understand the full scope first. I couldn't risk losing control, couldn't risk giving him the chance to twist the truth again. I had to be careful. I had to be smart. Minutes passed. He moved from room to room, always carrying the baby, always smiling at the woman who wasn't me. Their easy, natural interaction made my chest tighten even more. I realized how much time I had spent blind, how long I had trusted a man who had been leading a double life. Every small lie, every excuse, every late-night work emergency now made sense. And then, the fear hit me, not for myself but for what else he might be hiding. The longer I watched, the more I realized that this life was more extensive than I had imagined. There were details I didn't yet understand, a world I had never been allowed to see. And suddenly, the thought of him coming home to me, pretending like nothing had changed, made my stomach turn. I stayed hidden until the sun shifted higher, casting sharper shadows on the yard. I memorized the layout of the house, the way the doors opened, the paths he took. Every observation was a piece of evidence. Every detail mattered. I didn't know yet how I would use it, but I knew I had to keep watching. Finally, I stepped back from the hedge, feeling my legs stiffen and my body ache from crouching so long. I didn't leave the street entirely. Couldn't. Not yet. Not until I had processed what I had just seen. My husband wasn't at work, he wasn't with friends, he wasn't busy or stressed. He had been here, building a secret life that I had never been part of. And the weight of that truth pressed down on me as I sat in my car, the cold wind brushing against my face, and realized that nothing would ever feel the same again. The drive home felt surreal. Every familiar street suddenly looked strange, like I was seeing the world for the first time with eyes that had been forced open. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white, as my mind replayed everything I had just seen at the Blue House. My husband wasn't who I thought he was. He hadn't been for a long time. I pulled into our driveway and paused, my foot hovering over the brake. The house looked the same. Our home, filled with the furniture we'd chosen together, the photos on the wall, but inside, it felt alien. It wasn't just that he'd been lying. It was that he had built a life without me, and I'd been blind to it. That realization made my chest ache, but it also sparked a strange, sharp determination. He was home when I walked in. His voice called from the kitchen, cheerful, familiar, completely unaware that I knew. I kept my expression neutral, forcing a smile. "Hey," I said lightly as though nothing had changed, but inside, my mind was racing, cataloging every detail. Every movement, every word, every smile. It all suddenly felt like a performance. He set down his briefcase, and I noticed the faint floral scent again. My stomach twisted. I had smelled that scent before in passing, dismissed it, convinced myself I was imagining things. Now it made perfect sense. I clenched my fists at my sides, trying not to react, trying to hold myself steady. I couldn't let him see any of the fear or rage I felt inside. Not yet. I busied myself with dinner, chopping vegetables, setting the table. Every sound, the knife against the cutting board, the water running in the sink, felt exaggerated. He leaned against the counter, scrolling on his phone, humming a tune, completely unaware that I had just seen the life he was hiding from me. My heart kept tightening, the weight of betrayal pressing down like a physical force. We ate in silence for a while. I forced small talk about trivial things. A coworker's promotion, a package that arrived at the door, the weather. He nodded, smiled, offered the occasional comment, completely normal. But I felt like I was living in two worlds at once. Sitting across from the man I married, while my mind replayed the life he had been living in secret. After dinner, I washed the dishes slowly, deliberately letting the water run over my hands as I thought through what I had seen. I had evidence now, the photo, the emails, the hotel receipt. And yet, I didn't have answers to the questions that mattered most. Who was she? How long had this been going on? Was that baby his? Every unanswered question was a thread, and I felt like I had to follow them all to understand the truth. I remembered the messages from the unknown number. Someone had reached out, someone who knew. They had warned me, given me a glimpse of the secret life he had been hiding. But who were they, and why were they helping me? My mind twisted around possibilities, trying to make sense of it all. I didn't know if I could trust the stranger, but I also couldn't ignore them. Later, I went upstairs, pretending to be tired. He followed a few minutes later, ready for bed, completely oblivious to the storm swirling inside me. I lay down beside him, feeling the weight of his arm across the pillow, a ghost of intimacy that no longer felt real. I closed my eyes, trying to slow my racing thoughts, but all I could see were the images of him smiling at the baby, laughing with the other woman, building a life I hadn't been allowed to touch. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept imagining him leaving the house, driving to that blue house, holding that baby, carrying on with the life he had carefully hidden. Every creak of the house, every distant sound from the street outside, made me tense. I wanted to call him out, demand answers, confront him. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. I needed the whole truth, not just a confession in the middle of a living room argument. By midnight, I had decided on a plan. I would continue observing. I would watch carefully, note his patterns, track the times he left and returned. I wouldn't act recklessly, and I wouldn't confront him until I understood everything. The betrayal had been calculated. My response had to be strategic. I would collect evidence, uncover the full extent of his deception, and then decide how to move forward. As I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I was no longer just a passive participant in this marriage. I had become an observer, a detective, a woman fully aware of the web of lies around her. And for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of control. The betrayal had shaken me to my core, but it had also awakened something else. A resolve to face the truth and take charge of my own life, no matter how painful it might be. And in the quiet darkness of our bedroom, I made a silent vow to myself. I would uncover everything he had been hiding. I would know the truth before he had a chance to lie to me again. The next morning, I woke with a sense of urgency I couldn't ignore. My mind was still spinning from the previous day, replaying every movement, every smile, every interaction I had seen at the Blue House. I felt like I had been living in a fog, and now, for the first time in months, the fog had lifted, but what lay ahead was terrifyingly clear. I had to act carefully. I stayed in the house, pretending to go about my routine. Breakfast was a quiet affair. Coffee, toast, the clink of silverware against plates. He moved through the kitchen as usual, humming a song I didn't recognize, flipping a pancake with the ease of someone who had never carried a secret like the one I now held. I forced a smile, small talk, casual questions. Every word felt rehearsed on my part. Every gesture felt like a mask I was wearing to hide the storm inside. After he left for work, or so I thought, I grabbed my notebook and pen. I needed to map out everything I knew. The hotel receipt, the binder with printed emails, the photo, the messages from the unknown number. Each piece was a puzzle, and I refused to leave any detail unchecked. I wrote down times, dates, patterns, small observations that might seem insignificant to anyone else but to me now meant everything. I realized I was becoming hyper-aware, noticing things I had overlooked for months. The smell of his cologne lingering in the kitchen after he left. The faint scratch on his car door I hadn't paid attention to before. The way he always left the front light on for a few minutes like a signal. It was as if the entire world had shifted into high definition, and I could finally see the cracks beneath the surface of the life we had built. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. It was the unknown number again. My heart stopped. My hands shook as I unlocked it. A new message. Meet me at the diner on Elm Street, 11:30. Alone. I will explain everything. I stared at it for a long moment, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, to protect myself from whatever truth awaited me. But a stronger, fiercer part of me knew that I couldn't. I had to know. I arrived at the diner with 15 minutes to spare, parking on the street a block away. The neon sign buzzed softly in the cold morning light. I slipped inside, scanning the room, my eyes searching for anyone who might be waiting. A woman waved discreetly from a corner booth. She looked nervous but determined. I slid into the seat across from her. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't know how else to reach you. He's been hiding a lot. Not just the baby. Not just her. There's more. And I'm the only one who knows the full picture." I felt my chest tighten. "Who are you?" I asked, keeping my voice calm even as my mind raced. "My name is Lisa. I used to work with him. I know things you don't. I've been trying to figure out the best way to tell you without making things worse. But you deserve to know." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Go on." She took a deep breath. "He's been living a double life for over a year. The hotel, the messages, the baby. It's all part of it. But there's more. She's not just a fling. She's involved in something bigger. He's been covering for her. And I think she might be dangerous if she feels threatened." I froze. My mind spun. "Dangerous?" I whispered. "Yes," Lisa said, her eyes darting around the diner nervously. "I don't know exactly what she's capable of. But she's manipulative. And he's terrified of what she might do if she thinks she's losing him or the child." I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just betrayal. This wasn't just lies and secrets. This was a potential threat. To me, to our marriage, maybe even to our safety. My pulse raced, and yet beneath the fear, something cold and determined settled in me. I had been blind for months, but I wouldn't be blind anymore. Lisa slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "This is everything I know about where she goes. When they meet, what he's been telling her. Use it wisely. Be careful. Don't confront him yet. Observe. Gather proof. Then decide how to act." I took it, my hands trembling, unfolding it slowly. Every address, every timestamp, every name listed there made my heart sink and my resolve harden. The betrayal was bigger than I'd imagined, and the danger was real. But now I had a roadmap. I had a path forward. As I left the diner, I felt a mix of fear, anger, and clarity. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to his lies. I was planning, observing, learning. The scales had shifted, and I knew that in the coming days, I would see everything. Everything he had been hiding, everything he thought I would never discover. When I pulled into my driveway later that morning, I felt a cold determination settle over me. He could still pretend at home, still smile, still act like nothing had changed. But I knew better now. I had the evidence, the information, the knowledge of his secret world. And I would use it wisely. This betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was dangerous, and I wasn't going to let him or her control the story any longer. That night, I barely slept. The diner, Lisa's words, the folded list of addresses. They kept replaying in my mind, like a film I couldn't pause. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him with the baby, smiling at her, laughing, while I had been left in the dark. But it wasn't just the betrayal that kept me awake. It was the danger Lisa had warned about. That woman wasn't just a secret. She was a threat. I lay in bed beside my husband, pretending to sleep, listening to the sound of his breathing. Each inhale felt like a betrayal. Each exhale, a reminder that I had been living under a lie for months. I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks, making plans in my head. I couldn't confront him yet. I needed proof. I needed to see how deep this went. By morning, I had resolved to act carefully. I couldn't afford mistakes. I couldn't let him or her know I had discovered everything. Every routine he had, the times he left, the routes he drove, the days he spent working late, had to be observed and documented. I became meticulous, noting the smallest details. The way he touched his phone, the receipts he left on the counter, the faint smell of floral perfume that lingered on his coat. That evening, I followed him discreetly. He drove calmly, confidently, as though his secret world was untouchable. I stayed several blocks behind, careful not to be noticed. My pulse raced with every turn. The streets were quiet, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows, making the ordinary suburban neighborhood feel like the setting of a thriller. Every passing car made my stomach jump. He stopped at a gas station first, filling his tank, talking briefly to the attendant with a laugh that I once thought belonged only to me. Then he drove further, down side streets I didn't recognize, eventually arriving at a small townhouse tucked behind trees. I parked down the street, keeping my distance. From what I could see through the partially drawn curtains, he was waiting for someone. Minutes passed. The door opened and she stepped out. Lisa's warning had been right. She was elegant, calm, but there was a calculating energy about her that set my teeth on edge. She held the baby, and he greeted her with ease and intimacy that had no place in our marriage. I could barely breathe, but I remained hidden, forcing myself to observe. Every gesture, every laugh, every soft word he spoke to her reinforced the truth. This was a life built without me. I felt anger rise, sharp and hot, but I swallowed it down. Lisa's instructions echoed in my mind. Watch, gather proof, don't confront. I had to be strategic. The betrayal was already deep. The danger was real. But I had the power now. I was awake. I was seeing. And I would not let emotion cloud my judgment. I followed them when they left, careful to maintain distance. They drove to a park, and I parked behind a tree, the cold night air cutting through my coat. I watched as he pushed the baby in a stroller, laughing, talking with her. It was domestic, ordinary, terrifying in its normalcy. They were living a life that should have included me, and they had carefully erased my existence from it. When they finally returned home, I didn't follow inside. I stayed in the shadows, taking notes, memorizing license plates, directions, subtle habits. Every detail mattered. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was logistical. He had hidden it perfectly, like a professional hiding secrets. And now I was learning, catching up to him in a way he hadn't anticipated. By the time I returned home, it was nearly midnight. I slipped inside quietly, my heart still racing, my hands shaking. He was asleep, oblivious, completely unaware that I had traced his movements, mapped his routines, and now held knowledge that could unravel his hidden world. I didn't know what I would do next. I only knew I couldn't continue blindly. As I lay in bed, I realized something profound. The betrayal had given me clarity. I could see him for what he truly was, and I could see the path forward. I had to be patient, careful, intelligent. He had underestimated me. He had assumed that his secret life would remain hidden. But now I was awake, and I had the advantage of foresight. Sleep came briefly, fitfully, but when I awoke, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. The fear was still there, the heartbreak still raw, but beneath it all, a cold, resolute determination had settled in me. I wasn't just a victim of his deception. I was a strategist, observing, learning, preparing. And the day would come when every lie, every secret, every betrayal would be laid bare. For now I had to wait, watch, understand, and make sure that when the moment came, I would act with intelligence and precision. Because his betrayal had consequences, and I intended to meet them. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had witnessed. Every laugh, every gesture, every whispered word he shared with her replayed in my mind. But now I had to know the full truth. Not just glimpses, not just pieces of evidence, everything. The unknown number, the diner, Lisa's warnings. They all led to one unavoidable conclusion. I needed to see the entire story unfold with my own eyes. By mid-morning, I made the decision to visit the Blue House again. I parked down the street, keeping the engine running as I watched. Everything seemed calm at first, deceptively normal. Then I saw movement inside. A shadow crossing the living room, a hand adjusting a blanket. I realized, with a sinking heart, that today might bring the answers I had been waiting for. The front door opened, and he stepped outside with the baby in his arms. But this time it wasn't just her who appeared. A second woman, older, stern, carrying a bag, came into view. My pulse spiked. My mind raced. Who was she? How did she fit into this secret life? He greeted her with ease, as if nothing was unusual, and they exchanged words I couldn't hear from my vantage point. The baby cooed, reaching for him, and he smiled down at the child, his expression soft, familiar, but not for me. My chest ached with the realization that this was more than a single affair. This was a carefully constructed network of deception. I stayed hidden, straining to listen, piecing together fragments. He handed the baby to the second woman, and I noticed documents on the counter inside. A stack of papers neatly arranged, labeled with dates, names, and what looked like financial figures. My stomach sank. This wasn't just about a relationship. This was a hidden life with tangible, organized components, something deliberate and sustained. And then I heard it. Her voice, low, controlled, almost rehearsed, saying something that froze me. Once she finds out, we need to make sure he chooses the right side. I leaned closer behind the hedge, my hands trembling. Right side, I whispered under my breath. My heart raced. This wasn't just about an affair. It wasn't even just about a baby. They were planning, orchestrating something bigger, something I hadn't anticipated. I watched as he nodded, smiling politely, almost nervously. It was clear he was caught between two worlds, trying to appease both. My stomach twisted. I had assumed he was the one fully in control, but now I realized the depth of manipulation he had been under, and how carefully he had shielded me from it. Then the twist hit me. The woman with the bag wasn't just a casual acquaintance. She had connections, authority, a quiet power I hadn't expected. And the baby, it wasn't just evidence of his betrayal. It was leverage, a calculated piece in a puzzle I hadn't even realized existed. Every detail clicked into place. The late nights, the secret emails, the meticulous hotel stays. It wasn't just about an affair or a hidden child. It was about control. About secrets that had the power to change everything in our lives. He hadn't been reckless. He had been careful, but he wasn't alone in this. I sat back, stunned, trying to process. The reality was heavier than I had imagined. I had thought I understood the betrayal, that I could anticipate his moves. But I hadn't even scratched the surface. The full scope was terrifying. And yet, amid the fear and heartbreak, a strange clarity emerged. I now knew exactly what I was dealing with. The web of lies was vast, intricate, but not unmanageable. I had evidence. I had observation. I had the advantage of knowing the truth before he realized I did. For the first time, I felt a shift. Not just in fear or anger, but in strategy. I could no longer act out of emotion alone. If I confronted him now without understanding the full picture, I could jeopardize everything. I had to plan, watch, and be deliberate. Every move I made from this point forward had to be precise. As I drove back home later that day, the winter sun slanting through the trees, I realized something crucial. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't a passive victim of his deception. I was awake. I had knowledge, and knowledge was power. When I walked into the house, he was there, casually reading the newspaper. He looked up and smiled. My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. Not anymore. I had seen the full scope of his life outside this home, and now I understood exactly how carefully he had constructed it. I sat down, keeping my expression neutral, and felt a strange, cold determination settle in me. I would uncover every secret. I would gather every piece of proof. And when the time came, every lie, every betrayal, every hidden move would be revealed. Not recklessly, not with violence, but with precision. I realized that the major twist, the full extent of his deception, wasn't just emotional. It was a lesson in awareness, in patience, in strategy. And I knew that, if handled correctly, it would lead me to a place of clarity, justice, and control. For the first time in months, I wasn't just reacting to his lies. I was preparing for the moment when all of it would finally be exposed. And I was ready. The next few days felt like walking through fog. I went through my normal routines, making coffee, tidying the house, pretending to scroll through emails, while my mind replayed the revelation at the Blue House. The full scope of his betrayal was heavier than I could have imagined. It wasn't just a single secret or an affair. It was a carefully orchestrated life that had existed parallel to mine for over a year. And now that I knew, there was no going back. I spent hours going over the notes I had taken, the addresses, the times, the observations. Every small detail now fit into a pattern. I understood his routes, his routines, the subtle habits that had once seemed insignificant. He thought he was invisible, but I was paying attention. I had become the observer, the strategist, the one holding the advantage. Lisa had reached out again, confirming more pieces of the puzzle. She sent additional messages, small hints that expanded my understanding. The woman was connected to others I hadn't yet identified. The baby was part of a complex web that involved more than simple infidelity. My husband hadn't just been hiding a personal life. He had been maintaining a fragile balance between multiple realities, all while expecting me to remain blind. I watched him closely at home, noticing subtle behaviors I had previously ignored. The way he answered the phone quietly, the way he sometimes left a note on the counter that seemed trivial but was part of a pattern, the small adjustments he made to his schedule. Each detail told me something. Each movement confirmed what I had feared, and also revealed his vulnerability. One evening, he left earlier than usual. I decided to follow him discreetly. My hands were steady now, my mind sharp. I wasn't acting out of panic or emotion. I was acting with purpose. I traced his path to a small office building on the outskirts of town. He entered the building, looked around cautiously, and then disappeared inside. I waited across the street, observing silently. Minutes later, the door opened again, and a different woman emerged. She was younger, nervous, carrying what looked like a folder of documents. He spoke to her briefly, the conversation hushed, almost conspiratorial. I couldn't hear the words, but the body language told me enough. He was managing multiple layers of deception simultaneously. The complexity of his life outside my view was staggering. Driving home, I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and clarity. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined, but the truth had given me power. I now understood the patterns, the connections, the web he had spun, and I knew that with careful planning, I could reclaim control over the situation, over my life. Back home, he tried to act normal, expecting routine and complacency. I played along, keeping my voice calm, my expressions neutral. But inside, I was calculating. I reviewed every observation, every message, every step I had traced. I realized that I now held leverage, not in a threatening way but in a strategic, intelligent sense. I had the knowledge to act decisively when the time was right. That night, I sat alone in the living room, reviewing photos I had taken, notes I had made, text messages I had received. I felt a strange sense of resolve. The initial shock, the heartbreak, the anger, they were all still there, but beneath them was a cold, focused determination. I wouldn't be blindsided again. I wouldn't let the web of lies dictate my life. The final pieces of the truth emerged the next day. Lisa sent a message confirming the identity of A and her connections. She explained that some of the financial dealings and hidden movements I had noted were deliberate attempts to manipulate both him and me. Everything fit into place, the receipts, the late nights, the excuses, the hidden addresses. The betrayal was methodical, but it wasn't perfect. There were gaps, vulnerabilities I could exploit if I stayed patient. I realized something profound in that moment. The pain of betrayal was immense, but knowledge was liberating. I now had the full picture, the truth laid bare, and the ability to act with intelligence and precision. My husband had believed he controlled the narrative. He hadn't anticipated that I would see through the layers, observe, and understand. I felt a quiet, almost meditative sense of empowerment. The heartbreak was still there, but it was tempered by clarity. I had seen everything. I had documented everything. And now I could plan my next steps deliberately, calmly, without fear or rash decisions. Sitting in the quiet house, I understood that the final revelation, the full scope of his life outside our marriage, was both a weapon and a shield. It allowed me to protect myself, to understand him fully, and to determine how I wanted to respond. The power of the truth was in my hands. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was no longer a victim, that I didn't confront him immediately. That wasn't my plan. I had seen enough to know that emotion-driven reactions would only play into his hands. He had believed he could manipulate me, keep me blind, and maintain his carefully constructed life. Now, the advantage was mine. Knowledge was power, and I intended to use it quietly, strategically, with precision. The first step was observation. I continued to follow his routines, documenting every detail, every meeting, every interaction. I didn't rush. I didn't overstep. I stayed patient, like a chess player studying an opponent before making a move. Every note I took, every pattern I confirmed, gave me more control over the situation. The betrayal had been methodical, so my response had to be deliberate. I started making subtle changes at home. I left documents where he would find them, carefully chosen emails and receipts tucked into folders in places he might notice. Nothing direct, nothing accusatory. Just hints that his carefully hidden life was no longer invisible. It was like placing tiny breadcrumbs, letting him feel the weight of being observed without knowing exactly how much I knew. I also began quietly adjusting my own routines. I left the house earlier, returned later, pretended to be busy with errands and work while actually preparing evidence, mapping connections and documenting interactions. I wasn't acting recklessly or emotionally. I was building a detailed record, step by step, so that when the time came, I could reveal everything clearly and strategically. The subtle power shift began to affect him almost immediately. I could see it in his body language, in the way he checked his phone more often, glanced nervously at the clock, or hesitated before answering my casual questions. He didn't know I had observed his double life fully, nor did he realize that every step he took was being catalogued. For the first time, he wasn't fully in control. I also reached out to Lisa cautiously, confirming details, verifying patterns, and filling gaps in my understanding. She provided small, precise pieces of information that helped me anticipate movements, clarify timelines, and understand motivations. Her guidance was invaluable, not because I needed someone to tell me what to do, but because it allowed me to prepare, to plan, and to maintain control over the unfolding narrative. Each day, I felt more confident, more deliberate, more composed. I could watch him with the calm clarity of someone who fully understood the situation. Every laugh he shared at the Blue House, every tender gesture with the baby, every interaction with the other women. It no longer felt like poison. It was data, evidence, a map of his deception, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. And I began to act in small, quiet ways that unsettled him. A comment here, a pointed observation there, all subtle enough to seem casual but sharp enough to make him hesitate. I didn't accuse. I didn't confront. I let the tension build, knowing that each small action chipped away at the illusion of control he had maintained for months. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed. The evidence was organized, the patterns fully mapped, and I had verified all the details through observation and Lisa's information. I could have confronted him in anger, but I realized that my strength lay in patience and precision. There was no need for dramatic displays. True justice didn't have to scream. It could be quiet, inevitable, and undeniable. Finally, I decided it was time to act. I arranged for the documents, photos, and messages to be compiled and presented in a way that left no room for denial. Everything he had tried to hide, the double life, the secret relationships, the baby, the careful manipulation, would be revealed clearly, calmly, and thoroughly. The morning I left the folder on the kitchen counter, I felt a strange mix of relief and resolve. I didn't need to confront him verbally. I didn't need to yell or cry. The evidence would speak for itself. He would see that I had known, that I had watched, that I had understood every detail of his deception. The weight of his lies would finally settle on him, quiet but undeniable. As I walked away from the counter, I felt a sense of empowerment I hadn't experienced in months. The betrayal had been deep, the heartbreak immense, but the quiet, deliberate justice I had orchestrated was satisfying in a way that emotion alone could never achieve. I had taken control without violence, without drama, without losing my dignity. In the weeks that followed, I watched as the truth unfolded naturally. He struggled to maintain the facade, increasingly anxious, aware that his secrets were no longer safe. And I remained calm, collected, fully in control. My quiet revenge had worked, not because I had hurt him, but because I had reclaimed my power, exposed the truth, and ensured that he could no longer manipulate, deceive, or control me. After everything, the house finally felt quiet again. Not because the chaos had ended, my husband still lived here, still moved through the rooms, but because I had reclaimed control over my own life. The weight of secrecy, betrayal, and manipulation no longer pressed down on me. I could breathe again, fully, without the constant tension of wondering what was being hidden. I spent the morning slowly organizing my thoughts, reviewing everything I had documented, and reflecting on how far I had come. The pain of discovery was still there, raw and jagged, but it had transformed into something else. Clarity. I knew exactly what had happened, why it had happened, and what I would never allow again. That knowledge was liberating. I thought about him, sitting somewhere upstairs, probably pretending that nothing had changed. And in a strange way, I felt a calm satisfaction. Not because I had humiliated him or enacted some dramatic revenge, but because the balance of power had shifted. The one who had once deceived, manipulated, and controlled was no longer in charge. The truth, organized, undeniable, had become my ally. I walked through the house slowly, noting the familiar spaces, the kitchen, the living room, the bedroom. Everything looked the same, but everything felt different. The betrayal had changed the foundation of our lives. Yes, but it had also given me perspective, resilience, and a sense of self I hadn't had before. I realized that betrayal, while painful, can be transformative. It can teach you who you are, what you are capable of, and where your strength truly lies. I thought about the baby, about the blue house, about the women and the complex web my husband had built. Initially, the knowledge had terrified me, made me feel powerless and trapped. But now I saw it differently. Every deception had been a piece of a puzzle I had solved. Every hidden detail had been something I had uncovered, studied, and understood. And that understanding gave me power, not just over him, but over my own response. I began to plan my next steps carefully, not out of revenge, but out of self-preservation. Boundaries would be set. Consequences would be clear. I had learned that justice does not always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from strategy, patience, and the unwavering commitment to not allow deceit to dominate your life. There were moments of reflection that stung sharply. I remembered the early signs, the subtle behaviors I had ignored, the quiet unease I had dismissed as paranoia. I thought about how love can blind you, how trust can be weaponized, and how betrayal can come from the person closest to you. But those memories no longer held power over me. I had acknowledged them, faced them, and moved past them. I realized that my strength had grown in ways I hadn't expected. I had transformed from someone caught in a web of lies to someone fully aware, fully prepared, fully capable. The betrayal had tested every part of me. My patience, my emotional resilience, my intelligence. And I had passed the test. Not by reacting with anger or violence, but by observing, analyzing, and acting deliberately. The moral lesson became clear in that quiet morning light. True strength is not measured by how you endure betrayal silently, but by how you take control of your life after deception is revealed. It's about reclaiming power without losing your sense of self. It's about understanding the truth fully before deciding how to act. And it's about using knowledge as your shield, strategy as your weapon, and patience as your ally. I thought about the future. It wouldn't be easy. I would have to navigate the aftermath carefully, set boundaries, and maintain vigilance. But I felt ready. The experience had taught me not only about him, but about myself, my limits, my intelligence, my resolve. I was no longer the person who had been blind to the betrayal. I was someone who had seen, understood, and acted with clarity. Sitting in the quiet living room, I felt a deep sense of closure. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had not destroyed me. Instead, it had forged a version of myself that was stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. I understood now that life could be cruel, people could be deceptive, and love could be weaponized. But knowledge, strategy, and patience would always give me the power to reclaim my life. I took a deep breath, feeling the calm settle over me. The storm of lies, secrets, and betrayal had passed, and what remained was clarity, strength, and resolve. I was no longer the person who had been deceived. I was the person who had learned, endured, and risen above the deception. And that, I realized, was victory in its purest form. If the story touched you, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal, the weight of secrets, or the pain of discovering the truth too late, please take a moment to watch my previous stories. Every story is real, every heartbreak is raw, and every journey is about survival, resilience, and finding strength in the face of deception. Click on the links to my earlier videos and let yourself feel the emotions, the revelations, and the lessons I've learned. These aren't just stories. They're real experiences that remind us how fragile trust can be, how strong we can become, and how courage often comes quietly from the inside. I promise you, you won't just watch. You'll feel every moment, every heartbreak, and every victory. Please, stay with me. See the full journey, and let these stories remind us all that even in betrayal, there is strength, clarity, and hope.